then you think that translates to managers who are behind? They're going to pick up any dip?
Oh my God! If someone says, "Oh, I found something," it is not as high, and so let's buy it because I it's a FOMO situation. Look, there's some bullishness. There's bullish down underneath, and all you got to look at is Fed and cost efforts. That's something for us.
Guys ما بعرف إذا زبط أو لا.
You take out 5 billion more in costs.
ما بعرف كيف يعملوا فليب للكاميرا أساساً. هيك. Yeah.
Okay, so I got another company that
هات لنشوف.
goes down. Zscaler. And what is going on with Zscaler? Well, it's cybersecurity.
هاي بلال.
Incredibly high.
هاي نادر.
J is fantastic. And I think that the stock is
أهلا بالشباب أهلا يلا.
It's been such a winner. And the fact that it's down a little bit from its high, again, just makes it even more scrumptious.
أنا ما بعرف إذا حيكون لا مش اليوم مش لايف سيشن بس بدي أشوف إذا حينقلوا باول تستيفاينج هلا ولا لا. إذا لا منفوت منشوف إذا على بلومبرج ناقلينه. ليكو بيتكوين وين صرنا 29300. حوا فد شير هلا بده يحكي بعد شوي. الداو اوكي هلا حننطر شوي. جايز بس شغله لنتفق هول الاشياء كتير مهمين انتو يكون عندكم اياهم. اذا انتو عم تعملوا تريدينج عم تعملوا انفستمنت كتير مهم انه تقدروا تكونوا قادرين تتابعوا هول الاخبار. لانه هلا مثلا في واحد اجى قال لي شو بنشتري داو نازل والنازداك نازل. طيب اذا اليوم ما عم يحضر هو جيروم باول كيف بيعرف اذا الداو او النازداك نازل؟ كيف بيعرف؟ هذا السؤال. ما في يعرف لانه ما عنده معطيات اللي لازم يكون عنده اياها. هلو شو؟ هلو يا وائل. هلو يا جايز. هلو ليكو فاللي حيصير هلا حنشوف بس اذا باول لايف. قلت لنشوف على بلومبرج باي ذا واي. قلت لنشوف على بلومبرج اذا باول ناقلينه. تفضل. Fed chairman says higher interest rate is needed to curb inflation. تفضل. شو رأيكم يا جايز؟ شو رأيكم؟ هات لنشوف خيي. يلا وين اكونتي انا؟ هات لنشوف. يعني اوريدي بلش يخبرنا انه بدنا فايدة زيادة. عم تشوفوا يعني اللي قال لي بدنا نشتري داو اللي بده يشتري داو هلا. طب منطق. هات لنشوف. هيدي بقطعكم حدك اليوم انا.
Here are the top market stories that we're following for you at this hour. Load up on risk. KKR's Henry McVeigh says U.S. growth will be stronger this year than people think, and investors should add riskier assets. And the Powell play, Fed Chair Jay Powell kicking off his semi-annual testimony to Congress today, says higher rates are needed. Stocks and bonds sell off. The 2-year yield up by about 5 basis points. And crunch time for the BOE.
ما بنشتري شيء هلا بننطر.
Money markets price in a 6% terminal rate by December. From New York, I'm Alex Steele with my co-host in London, Guy Johnson. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. Guy, I think it's worth spending a moment to talk about the BOE and is it a cautionary tale for the U.S.?
The UK feels very idiosyncratic right now, though I suspect Governor Bailey would rather be in Jay Powell's shoes right now. I appreciate that Jay Powell has got a sort of difficult needle to thread.
Am I holding new classes? في عنا في الفري كورس. بس لحظة هلا بخبرك. هو ضروري تسمعون.
that later this week tomorrow we do see a 50 basis point hike. The Bank of England looks like it needs to get in front of this.
Yeah, and also, I mean, at least here in the U.S., we can start talking about certain soft landing scenarios, right? Like we're seeing jobless.
يعني عم يحكوا عن انه معقول السوق يتحرك بشكل تدريجيا نزول قبل ما يرجع يطلع. يعني عم نحكي عن السوفت لاندنج. هذا السوفت لاندنج اللي انتم عم تسمعوه كتير كنتوا. سوفت لاندنج هو فعليا لما ما بيصير في كراش. انا تقديري انه عم بيجربوا قد ما فيهم. تعرفوا كيف عندكم مثلا طيارة عم تهبط، عم بيجربوا ينزلوها بأقل ضرر ممكن، بس الطيارة عم تهبط ما فيها موتورات مش زابطين. اوكي، يعني ليكوا حتى كل الاسواق ملاحظ كله نزول داو ناسداك S&P كل شيء نزول. ما في الا بيتكوين ايثيريوم كريبتو. يعني اذا عم تلاحظوا كريبتو عم بيطلع بعكس ما عم نشوف الماركت. ليش؟ لانه في هروب. يعني عادة بيروحوا على بيتكوين او بيروحوا على الذهب. بهيك اوضاع شفنا توجه اكثر على بيتكوين لانه في صناديق استثمار عم بتفوت ببيتكوين، عم تعمل ETFs على بيتكوين. فهيدا الشيء عم بيساعد بيتكوين بيسكلي. بيتكوين وايثيريوم تيناتهم يعني. بس بدي اشوف ليه ما ناقلين هيدا. حتى بينقلوه على يوتيوب مزبوط، بس بدي اشوف اذا لا يا خيي. بيقول سمير شايف الداو طلوع يا برو. يا خيي كيف الداو طلوع برو؟ ما عم بيقول لك زلمه بده فوايد اكثر وبده هيدا. في سلف بالماركت، في سلف. شو شايف الداو طلوع؟ حللوا السوق، ما تشوفوا اذا الداو طلوع والداو نزول، مش هيك بتشوفوا. سمير انت خيي اليوم كتريدر بدك تشوف البيجر بيكتشر. انت كتريدر بدك تشوف البيجر بيكتشر. هيك الالفابت شيرز. هذا شيرز جوجل. انا اشتريت جوجل باي ذا واي، اشتريت الفابت بس لتعرفوا. حياخد لايف.
Kaylee, let's talk a little bit about what the committee is going to want to question Jay Powell about today. We are all going to be focused very much.
I know بس بدي انا تابع الماركتس in parallel كريم.
Where monetary policy goes from here. But I also look at the statement. It includes a few elements when it comes to the banking crisis.
سمير لا، لانه عم يطلع بيتكوين.
Where Jay Powell thinks the questioning is going to come from.
هات لنسمع هون.
Well, he's going to be asked like
هلا بترجم لكم.
especially as in his opening statement that Mike was just running through, he refers to this idea that policymakers may need to hike rates even further. He will likely get some pushback from Democratic lawmakers on this committee about why that is necessary and what economic pain may need to be caused as a result. But on the banking issue, that certainly is one he couldn't realistically avoid either, as the last time he appeared giving testimony like this was just days before Silicon Valley Bank collapsed back in March. And he will likely get questions around supervision, around the idea of capital requirements, what stricter regulation could be coming from the Federal Reserve as a supervisor, as well as just the health of the banking system overall and whether or not the Fed should continually hike rates into it going forward after pausing at this latest meeting. He also may get some more specific questions. Democrats may ask him about housing affordability, for example, and likely there will be some fiscal policy questions thrown at him as well. There always is, even though he says that's your job, not mine, to put it in a paraphrase way. But he could get some questions from Republicans about how maybe a need to pull back spending could actually help the Fed do its job in fighting inflation. There's always a few of those that are thrown at him. Kayla, we're also showing a board here about President Biden's other Fed nominees. Vice Chair Philip Jefferson, for example, also trying to be confirmed today. Adriana Kugler was going to be replacing Lyle Brainerd, and Governor Lisa Cook to extend her term. Any fireworks we can expect there? Well, you may see some Republicans on the Senate Banking Committee who are holding that hearing today push the likes of Jefferson and Cook, who of course already have seats on the board, are a bit more of a known quantity to commit to the fight against inflation, which they did in the opening remarks that we have seen. Adriana Kugler, of course, is a bit of a lesser known quantity, at least in terms of the Fed chair. Of course, she is significant because she would be the first Latina to sit on the Fed board. That is something a member of the committee, Senator Bob Menendez, had really been pushing for. So you could still see some politicking. As always, there is place in these hearings. A little bit of grandstanding, filming for campaign videos and the likes, but it is the expectation that these nominations should be able to get through the Senate Banking Committee. Of course, that happening today before the Banking Committee hears from Chairman Powell tomorrow. And we are still waiting on Powell, I would remind you, to arrive here at House Financial Services this morning to get this thing going.
He's just sat down, Kaylee. We've had the photographs taken, so we've got a clear shot of him now. And as soon as we get to the main event, we will bring that to you live. Kaylee Lyons joining us from Washington, D.C.
اجا القائد اجا البطل.
Our question of the day is a fairly straightforward one. Given what we've just heard, what is the power play? To try and answer that question, Ira Jersey of Bloomberg Intelligence. Mike is back with us. Ira, I'm sure you've run the statement through the model. What does it kick out in terms of the tone that we're getting?
Yeah, it actually shows our natural language processing model shows that this semi-annual policy report statement was actually dovish. So it's the first time that we've had a dovish signal from any of our analysis of the Fed statement using that model.
ليكو الكروس ريتس باي ذا واي
That doesn't necessarily
بس لا تعرفوا
mean that the
هو
Fed
لكل الكروس ريتس
is
هلا بيجوا
interest
بحطوهم.
rates, but I think what it does suggest is that there's still this balance of risk is toward, at this point, a little bit more towards slower growth and risk, even if the Fed ultimately does hike one more time, which I don't think that they're going to hike two, and I think Anna Wong at Bloomberg Economics agrees with that sentiment as well, that means that we're
الداو عم ليكو الداو بده يشتري هداك الداو بقول لك شو بنشتري الداو ليك طلع.
So, Mike, then to you, what's the Powell play when it comes to
Yes, it started.
no cuts? Get price back in.
Well, I think he would argue his statement's a little more hawkish, and he's going to emphasize the uncertainty that the Fed faces with the economy right now. The question of whether they raise rates, and if they do, when, is going to be a sort of a central question that the House and Senate hopefully will get at. I'm not sure we'll get an answer, but I do think that the Fed basically came out with the hawkish dot plot in order to push the rate cut people out of the Fed funds futures and OIS markets. And at this point, what they're really looking for is a sign of whether they have gone far enough. I don't know that you have a whole lot of data that's going to tell you by the July meeting that things have changed significantly. So
هلا we're waiting for the speech.
To maintain credibility, or they're going to look at the numbers and say, well, we're still making progress, so maybe we wait.
Is the power play, Mike, just to repeat what he said largely in the press conference a few days back, is the Fed satisfied that the market understands the reaction function that they're working with right now?
I'd say halfway. Certainly the market reaction to what they talked about last Wednesday, which is basically his opening statement again, has been in the direction the Fed wants. The market's priced out rate cuts. They're not going for two at this point, as Ira was pointing out, but they do think the Fed may go one more time. So that's what the Fed wants the markets to believe for right now and keep as a sort of status quo. However, I don't think that the market really knows what the Fed's going to do, and the Fed may not either. So he may not be completely satisfied with that. But if he can get out of the hearing without committing to anything, that would make everybody at the Fed happy.
This is something that may not make Amazon happy. Here's some breaking news for you. The FTC is suing Amazon for sabotaging consumer efforts to cancel Prime.
حدا يراقب امازون.
Over in Washington State, a consumer protection
حدا يراقب امازون.
for
اكلوا دعوة من
efforts to cancel Prime stock down at 0.7%. Guy, what I find interesting if you talk about reaction function,
هلا امازون مبروك.
is the whole curve is the yields are up by about 5 basis points, right? There's no real delineation between duration and then the short end also. And I wonder if we can glean anything from that, or is this sort of like we're going to sell off in sympathy with what the BOE is going through?
فكرة ما عندكم.
I think there probably was some read across from the Bank of England, and it speaks to a larger problem that central banks are dealing with around the world, which is that inflation is proving much more intractable than we originally anticipated, and as a result of which I think there is some gravitational effect. Ira, is that the right way of looking at the
أكيد
move?
it's decreasing.
Is the move today that we're seeing in the bond market a reaction to what we've had and are going to get from Jay Powell, or is it a kind of cumulative effect of what we're seeing folding the Bank of England in?
Well, the Bank of England certainly was the impetus for the initial sell-off, and I think that just it was solidified a little bit with Jay Powell's
Casey, I want you to look
remarks
at Amazon,
sort of
please.
semi-annual policy
Look
testimony.
at the number of orders coming
global
in.
rates are
Order
very
book,
highly
yeah.
correlated,
On the
particularly
I'm at the
among
list, yeah. Look at the order
four
book
large
and
developed markets. So
take a position
when
at
you have a significant
123
move in Japan or
if it reaches.
in the UK, then that's going to bleed into U.S. Treasuries. Now, does it persist? It will depend much more on domestic policy and the domestic economy. So I think today's move, 5 basis points in 10-year yield and 2-year yield, is just an acknowledgement, I think, firstly, that yes, the Federal Reserve may hike interest rates a little bit more, but importantly, the fact that you're not seeing significantly more flattening is that maybe the Fed is going to keep interest rates at the peak.
ولا إيه ما بدنا أنا عم بسمع هول أنا I like to hear the comments. بدكم نشوف على CNBC إذا لا بعد ليكم.
I think will be, and there's always a little bit of wiggle room that you have to give yourself in timing exactly when the Fed's going to end its move and then when it's going to ultimately cut. But once the Fed does start to cut, it's probably, in my view, going to cut much more quickly than
Nanor, thank you so much.
And that most market participants think. So instead of cutting 20
ما بعرف أنا I'm buying at 123.
more likely 50 basis points every meeting for half a year. So that's a couple of hundred basis points lower. That's right where about the 10-year yield is right now. So something like that is not an unreasonable level as far as the long end is concerned.
Ari, you've been talking about this for a while. The fact that when the cuts come, they're going to be very small, or they're going to be very aggressive and come very quickly. Alex, this is really interesting because in some ways that doesn't.
Daddy Powell.
with the part of the statement that Mike read out a little bit earlier on, which talks about the fact that it's going to take a long time to get inflation back down
Amazon.
to 2%.
بلشنا نشوف
Well, I guess it
Amazon.
just means that the pause or before they cut will just be very long. So instead of doing it say in December, it'll be
شفتوا الشارت تبع Amazon basically. هلا كيف نشوفها details أكتر بس it gives you a look
The
at.
Fed's summary of economic projections that they just put out last week doesn't suggest they get back to 2% until after 2025. So the Fed is going to need to keep rates elevated if that is their actual scenario, and we all know how much the scenarios have changed in short periods of time. But it doesn't suggest that they're going to be super aggressive in the near term. Now, what's the near term? They do think that they will be cutting rates by as much as a full percentage point by the end of 2024. When does that start? How many do they go at a time? I think they would prefer to go slowly.
عم بيقولوا معقول ينزلوا ل 1% بالفايدة قبل 2024 اللي هو شيء مش منيح by the way.
Because they'd like to keep their options open for cutting rates.
Exactly.
Back to something a little more normal. If we could.
كله ناطر أكيد. أكيد.
That really nicely brings us back to the House Financial Services Committee, and then what happens in the last quarter or 2024 is an election, and so it really sets up what the economy looks like, say in a year from now, that will lead us to a 100 basis point cut.
Yeah, we always talk about the presidential elections and the Federal Reserve not wanting to upset the political environment around elections. Some work that we've done in the past does suggest that the Federal Reserve starts policy moves, either hikes or cuts, usually before the convention.
100 basis points يعني you're 1%.
It kind of doesn't want to start cuts in say September or until after the election. So like the September meeting is kind of out for the start of any particular interest rate moves that they might do next year. But if they do start cutting say once a quarter and they've already done 1 or 2 of them, then they would continue potentially that policy. But it's new ones. The Fed isn't. It's supposed to be a political animal, but it necessarily has to be. I mean, just look where Jay Powell's going to be talking, who they're going to be talking to today. So
مجد it's not good لأنه النزلة كتير بطيئة يعني بعد عندك حتقعد أنت سنة ونص على فايدة 5% أو 4.5%.
To Jerome Powell, and as I say, we'll bring that to you as he starts speaking. Mike, the other issue is going to be the kind of issue of what is happening with the banking sector right now. When it comes to the Fed, do they think
عمتك يلن.
or is there an expectation that it's just
وحياة الله أنت وقلت له عمتك يلن ودادي باول.
I think they would sort of characterize price themselves are smoking the bear, walking around the campfire.
برافو عليك ماتريكس. Proud of you.
Make sure it doesn't flare up again. Powell, in his opening
Proud of you,
statement,
Matrix.
mentioned banking and suggested that the American banks are in pretty good shape now. They have been expecting credit tightening to impact the economy, but that's what would have happened anyway. And they're not seeing a real issue with the banks. That doesn't mean it can't come back.
Having stability, how indeed is something bad, Rami, because it drains liquidity from the market.
How did the Fed miss what was going to happen in the banking system when it raised rates so much?
خلاص حسميك ماتريكس يا
What are
محمد.
you going to do about it? Why haven't you done it all?
بالعكس ماتريكس حلو. هون فيك تحط بس مش على تليجرام دخيلك.
That we need to actually get a kind of credit crunch. Like I know the theory, but CRE is not falling out of bed. It's very pocketed, right? Like commercial and industrial loans are holding up. I mean, that doesn't signify sort of an imminent credit tightening cycle.
Yeah, so far you haven't.
يلا باب I will check the requests. مش أنا التيم عندي check the requests. أنا عندي ميتينج بعد 10 دقايق باي ذا واي، ما فيني ضلني عم بحضره للشيخ باول يعني بحبه كتير وهيك حأحضره ححطه بالباك جراوند صراحة. وفي عنا كيثي هي بتحضر كانت تعملنا سمري.
And by our calculations, come February 2024,
هيكو قد الدعوة عم يرجع عيد -86.
where you wind up getting some issues in the funding market. So that's similar to what happened in say September 2019. So we're going to be, I'm going to be very
شفتوا الدعوة عم يرجع يطلع.
how far they're going to allow the balance sheet to run off.
أمين ليك أمين حكينا خيي على حكينا على على انستا. طب سد الدنيا هيك يلا.
Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve, and without it, the economy does not work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. I will review the current economic situation before turning to monetary policy. The U.S. economy slowed significantly last year, and recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a modest pace. Although growth in consumer spending has picked up this year, activity in the housing sector remains weak, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment.
The
labor market remains very tight. Over the first 5 months of the year, job gains averaged a robust 314,000 jobs per month. The unemployment rate moved up but remained low in May at 3.7%. There are some signs that supply and demand in the labor market are coming into better balance. The labor force participation rate has moved up in recent months, particularly for individuals aged 25 to 54. Nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, and job vacancies have declined so far this year. While the jobs to workers gap has narrowed, labor demand still substantially exceeds the supply of available workers. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%. Over the 12 months ending in April, total personal consumption expenditures prices rose 4.4%. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 4.7%. In May, the 12-month change in the CPI came in at 4.0%, and the change in the core CPI was 5.3%. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year. Nonetheless, inflation pressures continue to run high, and the process of getting inflation back down to 2%.
هلا كلمة فيها تقلب بالماركت كلمة.
Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. With inflation running well above our longer run goal of 2% and with labor market conditions remaining tight.
طيب جايز فيكم تكملوا تحضروه على يوتيوب. أنا I have to jump يعني سوري بس I have a call بعد 5 minutes فمضطر.
We have been seeing the effects of our policy tightening on
I have to عندي كول بعد 5 دقايق.
sensitive sectors of the economy.
انفستر يعني ما فينا
It
نلعب.
will take time, however, for the full effects of monetary restraint to be realized, especially on inflation.
ايه
The economy is facing headwinds from tighter credit conditions for households and businesses, which are likely to weigh on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. And the extent of these effects remains uncertain. In light of how far we have come in tightening policy, the uncertain lags with which monetary policy affects the economy, and potential headwinds from credit tightening, the
حبيباتي
FOMC decided last week to maintain the target
أحلى
range
عالم
for
أنتو
federal
أحلى
funds
عالم.
rate at 5 to 5.25%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. Nearly all FOMC participants expect that it will be appropriate to raise interest rates somewhat further by the end of the year. But at last week's meeting, considering how far and how fast we've moved, we judged it prudent to hold the target range steady to allow the committee to assess additional information and its implications for monetary policy. In determining the extent of additional decisions meeting by meeting, based on the totality of incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and
Yalla, guys.
inflation, as well as the balance of risks. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term
بعدكم هون
inflation
أو
expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a period of below-trend growth and some softening in labor market conditions. Restoring price stability, again, is essential.